I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I, both females, had spent many days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon, in March 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Always up for some exploring, we took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on the NM55. It's a remote, teeny tiny 2-lane highway. We loved those types of roads, up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and desolate desert. You can see for miles, and there is virtually nothing except dirt and rock between towns, and towns can be miles apart. So, we were on the NM55 going north. After a few minutes, we saw a white pickup truck up ahead of us going the same direction. Suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to get uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were about half a mile away from him when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, but his truck was still pointed the direction we were going. We tried to relax a little. Surely, this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things. 1. There was only one person in the truck, a middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off of us. And 2, he was talking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and started following us. But he never got too close. He would get to within a few car lengths, and then drop back a little, and then speed back up again to within a few car lengths. We were getting nervous. We realized how alone we really were. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our cell phones, and neither one had signal. Typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our situation. Amy was driving and speeding up, while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. There was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town, Mountain Air. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us. He was going very, very slowly, maybe 20 miles an hour, if that. This pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us was newer. Amy had us up to 75 miles an hour, which wasn't typical for us on these 55 miles an hour highways. And we blew by the old pickup. As we passed it, we saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he was talking into a walkie-talkie again. After the white pickup passed him, he pulled a U-turn and pulled in behind it. As we watched all this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking to his walkie-talkie. No doubt these two knew each other. We were being deliberately followed, and for the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road. We truly thought old beat-up pickup guy had set up a trap in the road, and our vehicle would be disabled somehow. We talked about driving to the fields. We were in an SUV. But this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered. So we stayed on the highway. By now, the white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking to the walkie-talkie, and he stayed right on our bumper, and the other old pickup was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. The white pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got to within an inch of our back bumper. Amy floored it. We were passing 80 miles an hour and edging up to 90. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing going wrong would have been catastrophic. We absolutely were not going to slow down or stop if we could help it. The white pickup pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us and get back in front of us again. If he got in front of us and his body was behind us, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said, Salinas Pueblo, Missions National Monument, and it pointed towards a road on the left. And right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up on the blue pickup, we saw the plate said US Park Service. We looked at each other and then looked behind us. Both pickup trucks did U-turns and went the other way. We followed the blue pickup to Mountainair and then made our way to Albuquerque. I don't know exactly what those guys' intentions were, but they weren't good. There is something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police, and they said they would keep an eye on things. This area is very near Belen, New Mexico, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant Butte, New Mexico, which is where David Parker Ray had his little secret torture laboratory. We didn't pull all that together until later. Even though David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us, we do believe that there are others out there like him, and whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. Or maybe we came into a meth lab territory, but since this happened on an actual highway, rather than a backcountry road, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. Whatever is going on out there, it's not good. A couple of years back, my best friend and I went on a road trip to the States for a music festival. Met up with some friends, saw a lot of things and whatnot. One of our friends comes back home with us. He needed to get back home for school and his buddies didn't want to head home yet. We decided to drive straight home in shifts. Took us 24 hours for the full drive. Anyway, my story starts where I am driving, night shift at about 2 a.m. It is a beautifully clear night, full moon, no clouds, middle of the summer party type night. While noticing all these conditions, I also noticed we have followed the GPS onto a back road and driven into a huge valley. Open fields, not another car or house in sight. And it is important to note that we have not seen anyone or anything related to human presence for a few hours. Upon entering this valley, we lose our satellite signal. We have no satellite radio, no GPS, and no cell phone signal. Cool beans. Doesn't really matter as I know we followed this road for a couple more hours. About 20 minutes after entering this valley, and after losing all our connections, we come upon a bridge. As we get closer, I see a car pulled out on the side of the road. Not uncommon. People sleep in pullouts when they can. What is uncommon is the car has all of its windows blacked out. With all of the light from the moon, we should be able to see at least partially inside, but it was completely black. Getting closer, we also realize that it has no license plate that we can see. No big deal. We assume that it is abandoned out here in the boonies. That is, until we pass this vehicle and almost immediately its lights turn on, and it pulls out behind us on the road. Now, this is where it gets creepy. This vehicle starts tailgating us in the middle of nowhere, and we can't see who is inside or anything. Again, we brush it off. Maybe he is lost, or needs to follow someone out of the area. It doesn't explain the windows being blacked out, or the lack of license plate however. Anyway, with this car following us, I start to get an uneasy feeling. Subtle at first, but growing stronger. Soon I will get an all-out, get the freak away from this vehicle as soon as possible feeling. I also find it important to note that I do not frighten easily, I do not panic, and I only have ever gotten this feeling in times when I know in fact my life is in danger. I push these feelings aside, as it seems like the silliest response to a possibly explainable situation. That is until I see something in the middle of the road. Almost on cue, this car backs off, as I and my companions, one of whom was sleeping beforehand, try to make out what is in the middle of the road. Coming closer, we see what looks like to be a body laying in the middle of the lanes. This is not a big road, and like I said, it was also a back road, still paved, but very small. At this moment, and at the sight of what appears to be a body in the road ahead, we start freaking out. I, in no way, am stopping for no one in this desolate and isolated area. There are no other vehicles around, other than the one following us, and I can see no housing or lights for as far as the eye can see. No cell phone service, no satellite, nothing. I quickly tell the others that I'm not stopping, and I'm going around, or through. By this time, we are almost on it. There's no room to go around, as there are no shoulders on the road and deep ditches on the sides. And we are close enough to see now that it is a Scarecrow, and I drive over top and onwards. This car, small enough to go around it, continues to follow. I speed up, it speeds up. I slow down, it slows down as well, until I punch it. After about 2 minutes of this, the car slows down, does a U-turn and drives back. Now my passenger turns around to me and says, "I swear I saw spikes in that thing." Lucky for us, we were driving a huge truck. The wheel span was bigger than the Scarecrow on the road, and we never even touched it. It was another half hour before we reached cell services and the satellite picked back up. It wasn't until we reached home at 5 a.m. that we remembered, during this time, there had been a couple of missing people reported in our province. Ones who were on vacation and driving home from the States, who never made it home or were ever found. I and my passengers fully believe that we escaped some crazy Wolf Creek type of death for ourselves. We contacted the police about it and ended up making a full police report. However, we were unable to pinpoint the exact location. There wasn't anything they could really do other than file the report. We definitely didn't want this to happen to anyone else, as it was creepy as hell. My company used to have another office in another state that was 2 states over. Most of the time, I flew there, but sometimes we would have equipment or vehicles that needed to be delivered. On those cases, I volunteered to make the trip and would stay at the other office for a week at a time. Sometimes, I would take a rest stop at a motel, and sometimes I would break up the drive by pulling over to a rest stop and sleeping in the back of the vehicle for a bit. One time, I was driving a big box truck, like a big truck you would rent at U-Haul. We bought the truck, it was used, and the back of the truck was filled with equipment and stuff from that office, and so I offered to make the trip. Unfortunately, the morning I was scheduled to take off, there was a delay. Something I needed to take in that truck, I think was a big copier machine. It didn't arrive until almost 3 p.m. After loading in the truck and getting ready to take off, I knew I was going to hit rush hour traffic, so I opted to delay my leave for 2 hours, so it would be after 5. Even though there was still lots of traffic, it would only be local in the vicinity. And once I got out in the open, it was pretty much a straight shot, till I reached state line, having to pull over a couple of times to fuel and restroom breaks. I got into a rural area north of my state after midnight. I pulled over for one last time that night for fuel and coffee. The next stretch was going to be very dark and desolate, so I was preparing myself. I knew there was one last rest stop near the border, so I pulled over there to use the restroom, stretch my legs, and maybe rest a few minutes before moving on. So I pull up to the stop, and it's empty. It is somewhat well lit, and I was in pretty good shape, so I wasn't worried too much about my safety, as I used to box. I go to the restroom and wash up a bit, but when I make it back to my truck, there's a pickup truck standing next to it. This random guy starts to make small talk. Then he asked me if I was having mechanical problems with my truck. I thought it was odd, as why would that be a question? Anyway, I get back in my truck and take off. After this, there's a long stretch that is mostly forest-like area, kind of creepy driving through at 3 AM. There is a bridge up ahead, a long bridge, and having driven this route before, I know that under that bridge is like a gorge and water. All of a sudden, all my lights in the truck turn off. Headlights, instrument lights, even the running lights. I tap on the brakes and look behind me, even the brake lights seem to be out. Thankfully, it was a moonlit night, enough to me to gauge what was ahead of me. I was sort of more angry than in panic, so I slammed my fist on the dashboard and yelled something like, "Damn truck." It was a Fonz move, because suddenly, everything came back up again. I drove looking for somewhere to stop, like a gas station, motel, shopping center, something, but nothing was in sight. I remembered a gas station which I had stopped another time before, which was in a city about 10 more miles up the road. I make it to that gas station, and noticed that shortly after I pulled in, that same pickup truck with that same random guy pulled over. Now, he wasn't pulling up to the pumps, but I suddenly got this chill, thinking that creep did something to my truck. I started to put some fuel in the truck, thinking about my next move. Then, just as I was about to get back in my truck and try to make it on, a cop car pulls into the station, and I wave at it and get out to make some small talk to the cop and point back into the direction of the street where that pickup truck was pulled over. After I did this, he drove off. I think I asked the police about the road conditions and asked him if there was a motel or something up ahead. When I got back in my truck, I decided if that guy had did something that might disable my truck, I better pull off for the night. I kept looking behind me to see if the truck was following me. I think it was, but I couldn't be sure. I finally make it to another town, a bit larger than the one I had left, and there was a motel. I find a motel that was next to another gas station and I check in. I lock up my truck, grab my bag and keep looking around me, expecting something to pop out. I get into my room and try to sleep, but I kept looking out my window. I only slept a few minutes at a time. By daybreak, I check out, eat breakfast and head back on the road. I eventually make it to my office and ask them to have my truck looked at by the mechanic. They reported back to me after I was back home that the mechanic found nothing wrong and they never experienced the same issue ever again. For you horror fans who made it this far into the video, a massive thank you. I have 2 more short bonus stories for you guys. May I ask you to please hit the like button, as this will help the community grow. Now, road ambushes up ahead. Enjoy. Last night, I was at a classmate's house working on a group project we have due tomorrow. I live in an apartment in the town where our university is located, and my classmate lives at his parents' house, which is in the foothills just outside of town. In order to get to the house, you have to drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 5 or 6 miles. We started working on the project at about 6 PM, and I ended up hanging around for a while after we had finished our working. So I left his house pretty late, at about 11, and started driving down the road back towards town. I didn't realize how tough it would be to navigate the road at night. There were no street lights, and the road was unkept and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell service, so I had to drive very slowly to make sure I didn't blow out one of my tires, since I had used my spare a couple of weeks back. I figure I was about 3 miles from the house when I rounded a tight corner and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell parked diagonally across the road. The manner in which it was parked completely impeded my path, and I couldn't drive around it because there was a gully on both sides of the road. The only way for me to go at this point was backward, where there was a pull-off that I could use to turn my car around. At first, I couldn't see inside the cab, but when I turned on my high beams, I saw that there was a man slouched over in the driver's seat, his head resting against the steering wheel, as if he had been knocked out after a bad accident. I immediately sensed something was wrong. The way his car had just coincidentally come to rest in a position that totally blocked the road was a big red flag for me. I had heard stories of people playing dead in the road as a way to lure unsuspecting people out of their cars so they could rob him. I decided, screw this shit, and elected to go back to my classmate's house and explain what was going on. I threw the car in reverse and kept my eyes darting back and forth between my rear view mirror and the truck. I looked and saw that I was almost to the pull-off where I could turn around. When I looked back, my heart skipped about 5 beats. The man who had been slouched over in the driver's seat was now walking at my car at a hurried pace, while a few other men jumped out of the camper shell and started moving towards me as well. I panicked and accelerated backwards into the pull-off, which messed up the undercarriage of my car pretty bad. As I put it into drive, the guy was already at my passenger side door tugging on the handle, which, thank the Lord, was locked. I only caught a brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbled and leathery, definitely a meth head or some sort of drug abuser. I sped away and didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rear view to see if they were following me. Thankfully, they didn't tail me, and when I reached the house, I explained what had happened to my classmate, and we called the cops. I was grateful that my buddy's parents were kind enough to let me stay the night. They didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report, and they told me they would be on the lookout for similar vehicles and suspicious activity. But holy damn, I'm still so shook up over it. I keep getting the same adrenaline rush I got when I saw the guy charging me whenever I think about it. This was several years ago. I was reminded of it. It was bizarre enough that I had to ask my wife, who had been with me, if I imagined it. It was late at night, but still about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, just north of the border to Mexico. We were on a side road that had one sidewalk up against a wall on the right, and to the left was an open field with large rocks. I was driving. We had driven this road almost daily, so we were familiar with it. The radio had been working poorly, so I turned it off. We were kind of tired, so maybe our perceptions were off. Maybe we only noticed this whole thing because we didn't have the radio on. There was a man laying in the gutter in a light blue button-down shirt, blue jeans, and brown shoes, with his face down, laying still, just below the sidewalk. This occurred within a few seconds that felt like they took longer. My wife wanted to make sure he was breathing. I slowed down the car and pulled over, but on instinct, I told my wife to stay in the car. All my internal alarms were going off. I could hear my own heartbeat and felt watched. She knows to trust me when I have moments like this, so she looked more critically at this situation. The following description is a combination of what we both noticed. There were boulders from the field that had been dragged close to the road. There were streaks of fresh soil. It was really obvious that they had just recently been moved. And on the far side of the recently moved boulders, I could see a bluish light. As though someone facing the road was reading something on their phone, just out of sight. The light turned off as soon as I looked that way. The man, laying in the gutter, was definitely breathing. There was no blood near him, and his back and sleeves were clean. We had to go. I just knew it. I punched the gas pedal and we got the heck out of there. In the rearview mirror, I saw 5 men running out from behind the boulders, who had been running at the car and stopped when I sped away, but they were watching us leave. One of them helped the guy who was laying down. When we got to our destination, I called the police and reported it, but they basically told me to sit and let it spin. A few days later, the news reported that there was an attack at night, location undisclosed, but in this particular town, where a person pulled over their car when they saw a man lying in the road and was attacked by the man and his cohorts. Thankfully, the victim had managed to escape.